Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink It Up Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show. Most powerful names in entertainment every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Do you think it's appropriate that they have an election and 5 days later they're nowhere close to picking a winner?
State and local officials acknowledge they are slow. They're urging.
No, they're crooked.
They're urging the votes to be counted quick. That's how they vote in
They're crooked,
California.
just like you're crooked. Your press is crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on The Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Now, here is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
Yeah, by now, most Americans have probably heard at least some of that Meet the Press interview of Crooked Donald. We're going to hear more highlights from that in just a few moments. First, I want to introduce my co-hosts in the Tan Talk studio, both attorneys. First, Gary Gibbons, along with former Circuit Judge Kevin Carey. And in the second hour of our show, we'll follow up on our conversation last week with the host of Freedom Works. That would be Paul Malloy and his Eye in the Northern Sky, Angelo Ceresi. And we'll look at some of the kind of astounding levels of corruption in the Trump administration later on in the program, too. For now, issue number one. Meet the Press host Kirsten Welker interviewed Crooked Donald in a Wisconsin barn last week during a rainstorm, but the real storm struck when she pressed him for any shred of evidence of election fraud, which he relentlessly maintains routinely takes place in our elections. So whenever he loses, it's fraud. When he wins, it's a clean election. Isn't that curious? Well, like any self-respecting bully without a shred of evidence to produce, he resorted to insulting the interview and ultimately storming out of the barn.
You're either crooked or you're stupid. You play right into their hands with this rap. You know that these elections are rigged. Your network knows that they're rigged. You know that I won an election in a landslide, and I got 94% bad press.
But, Mr. President,
you know why I got that? Because you have no credibility.
But you've never presented evidence that it was rigged. Let's keep talking about, I want to talk about Todd
You
Blanche.
have more evidence. There's more evidence than ever presented.
Let's talk about
your elections in this country. We're like a third world country. Your elections are crooked, and you're crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked, and so is ABC and CBS. And CNN.
But Mr. President,
you're one-sided crooked network. So let's call it quits because I've had enough. Thank you, darling. Have a good time. You ought to straighten out your press because you know what?
Mr.
A country can never be great with the dishonest press.
We traveled all the way to Wisconsin for this interview.
You know, how this man treats journalists is despicable. He shows no respect at all for someone like Kristen Welker, who it was just telling the truth. I mean, if you listen to this, to Trump, he sounds like the crazy uncle you want to put in the garage. I mean, he's talking crazy. I mean, if you heard him say these things that have no proof at all to them, it's frightening to me that anybody would think this person should have the button on the nuclear code in the White House. But the way he treats these journalists, particularly women journalists. He's just very disrespectful. I don't know. At some point, it should bother some of these MAGA Republicans how he just treats people. He's a mean-spirited, ignorant man.
But he knows crooked when he sees it because he looks in the mirror every day. So,
well, as you said, it's interesting when he wins. The election was just perfect. Although, he never got over the fact in 2016 that he didn't win the popular vote, even though he snuck in on the list, crazy electoral college. But he still was fixated to this day on the fact that he won the popular vote, even though he lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Well, his lawyer, in those cases where he was challenging the 2020 election, Rudy Giuliani, remember he famously said, "We have a lot of theories, we don't have a lot of proof." Mm-hmm. Well, that's what's required. That's the evidence that everybody keeps asking about, and it just doesn't exist. And that's why, when if it takes any time at all to count votes, he says there's fraud. Well, I was out in California visiting my sister-in-law a couple of weeks ago, and she showed me the ballot for governor. It had 63 names on it. And so many people out there were uncertain about who they were going to vote for. And a lot of them vote by mail. And they turned them in on the last day or the day before the election because they hadn't made up their minds about who they were going to vote for. And then California allows ballots to come in for 7 days because of the post office. And so if they're postmarked within that 7 days, it's okay. And it takes a long time to count them.
And verify them too, right? They want to verify them.
40 million people that live there. It's bigger than many countries. And for them to take longer, yes, it's nobody likes it, but it doesn't mean that it's crooked.
They spent 30 days counting the votes when Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor, and he's a Republican. Where's the corruption?
Well, Ed and Gary, what you heard from Trump, in that rainstorm in Wisconsin, where he just was like a child, is that he's in a bubble where nobody in the cabinet challenges him. So he lives in a fantasy world. He was talking about, and you mentioned Gary, California. That's how the system is. If you want to change the system in a particular state, then change the system. But he's ranting about this being corrupt. As you just said, that's how the system works. But when his candidate starts losing, when those votes start coming in, automatically it's rigged. Trump has two worlds. He either wins or he's cheated. Yeah. That's all this man knows. That is not a logical, rational person that we have in the White House.
So he's telling us that not only are the elections essentially a third world. He said the elections are like a third world country, but he also says the polls are fake because his poll numbers are just in the gutter. So what is his motivation behind repeating this lie over and over and over again? What I think is he knows how much trouble he's in. He's seeing it every day. He can't figure out how to deal with this Iran conflict, and he realizes that prices are going to continue to go up. And he's going to have his head handed to him in the November elections unless he figures out a way to cheat. So by trying to undermine Americans' confidence in the election system, he can come along in November and say, we have ample evidence of fraud being committed by the Democrats. We've got to seize the voting machines. His Gestapo ICE agencies have an astounding budget that goes on for years, and they don't need to account for how they spend any of it. So he's got all the goons he needs to go in and seize voting machines, and then he will tell us who wins the elections. And that's what's behind all this, I think. And I mean, I don't have the ability to foresee the future, but I'll tell you what, everything is pointing toward that. It comes right out of the Orban playbook from Hungary, from the way any autocrat seizes power. That's what you need to do. And I think that's what he's setting up for. That's why he keeps harping over and over that the elections have no credibility at all. I can see through it, even though I don't need to give you any evidence.
You know what's incredible, just quickly, if you look at the polls, and no one around this table would have ever voted for Trump. It'd be a cold day in hell for any of us would have ever voted for that sick man. But if you look at the polls, the people that voted for him in 2024, the Generation Z, Generation X, males, Latinas, the numbers are staggering. He's 20 points, 15, 20 points below where he was in November of 2024.
The Department of Justice had a division that was in charge of investigating whether elections were held properly. And what was the first thing that Todd Blanche did as the Deputy Secretary or Attorney General? They disbanded it.
Mm-hmm.
So, they have no interest in really looking at whether elections are fair and accurate. Instead, what they want to do is have him come out, the president come out and say they're crooked, and then have nobody available to go look and see whether what he said is true or not.
And Mike Johnson's backing him up all the way.
Oh, of course.
You know,
They all do.
if you went back and you analyzed every comment that Kristen Welker made, every one of the comments she made was true. Every one of them was
Sure.
true. These are facts. And the distinction you mentioned Giuliani making these comments, the difference between him and Trump is he got disbarred as an attorney, and you know this, Gary, as a fellow attorney. You can't make those statements in a court of law before a judge and get away with it. Trump gets away with these shenanigans and these crazy statements because he's not subject to a bar. And which is, by the way, as you know, we've talked about, the DOJ wants to take over all controls, so no bar association or Supreme Court in any state can discipline a DOJ attorney, which is just incredible.
That's another Todd Blanche decision, and his judgment is just horrible. And if he gets he should not be confirmed, but I think he is going to be confirmed.
Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the program. Some other lowlights from the interview. Crooked Donald accused undercover FBI agents of spurring on the January 6th crowd and attacking the Capitol Police. Now, think about how dumb that is. That's what his excuse is for these blanket pardons, that the FBI planted a bunch of agents in the crowd and compelled them to invade the Capitol and tear it up and look for Mike Pence to hang him and all this stuff. Now, think about it.
He said Biden put him there, and Biden wasn't the president.
Biden was a citizen. But yeah, and he maintained that a lot of these rioters were forced to plead guilty because the prosecutor was telling them, if you don't, you're going to go in front of a jury and get a much higher sentence. So all of them that pleaded guilty were conned into it, in spite of the fact that we have video evidence of them assaulting the policemen. Now,
you know what's astonishing about that quickly, Ed, is he made a comment that the slush fund, this $1.8 billion slush fund, was needed because many people that were supporting him committed suicide thereafter. He didn't mention one iota the fact that 4 police officers who were assaulted on that day committed suicide within months of that January 6th. He didn't mention them at all. And he cares about these police officers as the party of law and order. He talked about these assaulters being the ones who committed suicide, but he didn't make any reference to the 4 police officers who committed suicide after January 6th.
No, he only cares about building a militia that's loyal to him. And that's what this is about.
The other thing is this: there's so much video evidence of what happened on that day. Doesn't it make sense that if FBI agents had been planted in there, we would have video evidence of them? And now, as the chief law enforcement and agent of the nation, he would direct the head of the FBI to go in and find those agents and prosecute them all.
Yeah, they have facial recognition.
He could find some redneck from Wisconsin just by facial recognition. They would easily be able to identify any FBI agencies that were planted there. Why hasn't there been a single prosecution, even an accusation? Not
and it's
one.
It's total nonsense. It's like if I said to you that 4 Martians landed on my roof last night.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just not. How do you debate nonsense? It's just, I really, this man is not sane. He's not logical or rational. It frightens me that he's in the White House.
And that's why he got so mad at Welker, is because she wouldn't take his bull manure. She kept pressing him for evidence, and he doesn't have any. I mean, he says things so fast, he fires so many lies at her that she can't even respond to a lot of them. For example, he said, well, I built up the military that went into Iran. So what are we supposed to believe? That under Biden, we didn't have any aircraft carriers, or we didn't have any fighter jets, and we built all them in 6 months? Do you know how long it takes to build something like the Ford aircraft carrier and all of those planes and all those? And what was being done with the budget? What does he allege? That we just had no military, and then in he comes and now we got this great military? He throws stuff like that out it's so asinine. But he runs it by everybody so fast that they never stop and talk about that, because there's such a bigger lie at the end of the sentence that they ask him about, and then he doesn't address that either.
I don't know what our friends who were on the show last week and others, what they say about that when you say objectively that these are just false statements. I don't know what they say. I don't know if they even attempt to respond to that, because these aren't debatable. The statements he made last week are completely false. And you made a point just briefly on back on ice for a minute, Gary. They're given a blank check right now. It is frightening to me knowing what, we only have 2 hours today, but what's happening at these detention centers. And I was listening last night. These people are being shipped off to these countries for minor crimes like shoplifting when they were a teenager, and they're sending them to Somalia. They're sending them to countries that have no relation to where they came from. It just makes no sense.
The cruelty is the point.
It is very cruel. You're right, Ed.
He claimed that the farmers all love him because he gave them the $25 billion when their markets collapsed because of his mucked up trade policies and tariff policies, right? Well, first of all, isn't that socialism? That's not free market. And second of all, they don't love him because they're seeing their prices to operate going up drastically. And a lot of them are going to face foreclosure on their farms. They can't pay those bills anymore. And that's not the way the government's supposed to work, is to support farmers because you destroy their markets.
Well, first it was the tariffs that destroyed the market, the soybean farmers, for example, in Iowa, that sold everything that they grew to China, and China said, we're not going to buy those anymore.
Just go to Brazil.
Yeah. And then every time you turn around, he's doing something to stick a finger in their eye, starting the war in Iran. And guess where all the fertilizer comes from? It comes through the Strait of Hormuz. And so, none of that is moving, and the prices of what little fertilizer there is going through the roof, and they can't afford to plant their crops and grow them this year.
On Iran, they shot down an Apache helicopter.
Yep.
2 people, as if that was not a big deal. My son-in-law is a captain in the Army that he flies the Black Hawk helicopter, so I have a lot of knowledge of those helicopters. The Apache is a more aggressive helicopter, but it was shot down, a $50 million helicopter. 2 people were saved, but think about that. And there's a ceasefire going on. It's comical. They're shooting at us, and those two pilots could have been killed. The fact that they survived, but think about what a traumatic experience that was for them. And to say, well, there's no war going on right now, is just absurd.
We're always just a few days away from a settlement from the world's greatest negotiator, who, if he was such a great negotiator, would have negotiated a settlement before all this started. And I'm hearing the commentators claiming that Iran is drawing this thing out intentionally because they see how much trouble he's in the midterms. And it goes all the way back to how they got Carter out of office and Reagan in so they could get the arms through the Iranian arms deal, right? By holding those hostages until the day, in fact, the hour that Reagan was sworn in, that's when they released the hostages. And then he repaid them with the arms deal, Ollie North, that whole story. It was a big scam. They can see how much power they have over a president in this country, and they're perfectly willing to execute that power.
Every problem this president has is of his own making.
Yeah, I know it.
He causes the problem. He's not facing world issues that come to him. There was no doubt that this war should never have been started. There's no doubt that Iran it has the patience to hold on. They've now got this huge leverage of controlling the Strait of Hormuz and creating this economic crisis that's a world crisis. And Trump has no patience. His wingspan or his patience span is about 12 seconds, less than a child. So there's no question, Ed, you're correct, that they're going to use this leverage knowing the midterms are coming up.
And is it any wonder that he can't strike a deal? One day he's sending people that have no expertise in negotiations, Steve Witkoff and Jared, and instead of people that have worked in the State Department for many decades, under different presidents who know how to
expertise,
who know how to talk to other countries, and then he gets impatient and he blows up and he does something, says something that completely derails any talks that have happened so far. He doesn't know how to do this. He's so used to people knuckling under when he asks them to do something, and what does that say about the people in this country that do that? The rest of the world is saying, screw you. We see right through you. You're so transparent. We're going to play you like a fiddle. And that's what Iran's doing right now. They're delaying on purpose because they know that he is too anxious to get this thing resolved because it's hurting him horribly politically.
I would say that he's becoming desperate right now. And they know that. These aren't idiots in Iran. They know the situation. They're a patient country. For them, a few months is not a big deal, and they have the leverage right now. They're not getting hurt that badly. In the meantime, what they're doing in terms of the situation with nuclear uranium is getting worse. There's no inspection going on as we had under the Obama plan of 2015.
I'm going to talk about that in just a second, but I also want to reiterate, having put Sergeant Bilko in charge of the Pentagon means that he didn't have generals with experience who had exercised these war games to have told him what was going to happen if he did this. So he just brushes all this aside. And when it happens, then he says, oh, I knew this was going to happen. I knew we were going to have high fuel prices and high inflation. I just thought it would be a lot higher. So we're really achieving success because we aren't having inflation as high as I predicted it would be. No, this caught him totally flat-footed. He thought this would never happen. And that's why he went through with it.
He took a gamble. He thought that they would not close the Strait of Hormuz, even though everybody that had ever war gamed it out said that's the card they'll play first.
Yes.
I don't think that they even considered that was a possibility. Yeah. That was just malpractice in that regard. He doesn't have anyone in the room that's competent. Or, well, listen, he tells people what he wants. Like we've said before, his first chapter, there were a few people in the cabinet who actually would push back. He's got nobody in that cabinet now that will say peep to him. And this is what you have. You have chaos. You've got a horrible economy. You got this war that is not going to end. As Democrats, we just need to get out of the way and let it continue to be worse. Inflation was 4.2% in May, very, very high, highest it's been in years. There's nothing as a Republican you can run on when you get to the podium and try and get reelected.
You're right. The JCPOA was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Trump says it was going to expire. In fact, that's true. He had a press conference Wednesday, and he asserted that this whole thing was a disaster, the worst agreement ever devised by any two nations in the history of the known universe. And it was going to expire and lead Iran to have developed a nuclear bomb that by now they would have deployed on Israel and the United States and the rest of the world. And we all are only alive because of what Donald Trump did, or words to that effect. Okay. But actually, so yes, it was structured with multiple expiration dates, and those were called the sunset clauses that set limits on Iran's nuclear and enrichment activities, eventually culminating in the agreement's termination. So the original timeline started with October 2023, which was transition days, 8 years after the whole thing was adopted. And that milestone would have lifted previous UN restrictions on Iran's ballistic missile activities and sensitive technologies. But it doesn't mean they could have a bomb. We're just talking about ballistic missiles and technologies. Now, 2 years later, in October of 2025, was what's called Termination Day. And that would have taken place 10 years after the whole thing was adopted. And that marked the scheduled conclusion of the deal. It was intended to terminate UN Security Council Resolution 2231 and close Iran's nuclear file, although European and UN powers reimposed sanctions prior to that deadline, citing that Iran was not in compliance. And from 2031 and beyond, they had certain long-term provisions, such as strict monitoring by the International Atomic Energy Agency and restrictions on uranium enrichment capabilities that were going to last 15 to 25 years. So there was no logical reason to tear this up. This thing would have gone on well into the next decade. And by that time, we could negotiate something else with them if we really were concerned about.
You're
that.
exactly right. But also keep in mind too, our allies were behind this too. It wasn't just us against the world, which is what Trump is. We had Europe, we had all our allies,
Russia and China, all mixed up in this.
All was behind this, and it was a perfectly good agreement, except the fact that I'm sure Trump didn't like the fact that it was an Obama document, so he tore it up. Here we are. He won't get close to that now. He's desperate. He's begging to get someone to come to the table right now. It's not going to look good. And what's interesting to me, I was watching last night that the Fox News people are all over them. Even his lackeys at Fox are saying this war is not going to end. And when we have an audio later kind of making fun about it, he keeps saying, Taco Don, 10 days, 5 days, 2 weeks. When is it going to end?
He tore it up in May of 2018. And so he's allowed them to enrich uranium since that time to the present. And how stupid is it to tear up an agreement and then say, oh, I'm going to make a better one? Why wouldn't you try to make a better one while you had one in place that had buy-in from all of the international community? They would have joined in to extend it. Instead, he just shows that we can't be trusted on anything. We won't live up to any of our agreements.
And he's made the world much more dangerous because the nuclear capability is not, there's no inspection opportunities now, and they're now emboldened with this. And you're not going to threaten them and bomb them out of nuclear capability. That's never going to work. It just shows complete ignorance of history.
And he was so critical of the aspect of that agreement that gave them, the Iranians, back some of the money that had been seized. We had sequestered their assets and had not released those. And part of the deal was we had to give them back the money that we had seized. Well, that was the big stick in the mud for him. He was like, I can't believe that Obama gave him money. Well, you watch how much they're going to ask for now in order just to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And it's going to be many times more than what was released before.
And he tries to create the illusion that he was just throwing away tax money, but it was their money that they had in deposit in our banks.
Exactly. They said, we're not going to do this deal unless you give us back the money that you stole from us.
And again, keep in mind, is it okay that he arbitrarily, Iran blows these helicopters out of the sky? When did that become okay? There's no, you don't hear any people being upset about that. These two pilots in this Apache helicopter were blown out of the sky a few days ago, and they don't seem to give a damn about it. Oh, we rescued them. No big deal. We left $50 million, by the way, for that helicopter. That should bother people.
It should bother the president. And because he's so desirous of making a deal to get out of this mess he's created, he just blows that off. Oh, that's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal.
They're laughing at him. He's a laughing stock right now.
And my question is, what is this going to do to the credibility of this nation on the world stage in the future, even 5 to 10 years down the road? The rest of the world's going to look at us and say, if they can put this imbecile, this utter baboon in power who doesn't know what he's going to do, why won't they do it again someday?
Yep.
And so that means all of our relations with our allies are going to be strained maybe till mid-century or later.
If they can ever be repaired.
It's about credibility. And I know, when Biden came in 2020, and I'm sure that he was making some assurances there'd never be this situation again. And here we come in 2024, we put this madman back in the White House.
You're listening to The Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network with me, Ed Golly. My co-hosts are Gary Gibbons and Kevin Carey. We're going to take a quick break. And when we return, we're going to look in on some of the primary elections held this week and what's really behind the UFC cage fights coming up this Sunday. That, along with more of the issues the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
if there's one thing we can be assured about in our president, it's that he's consistently inconsistent.
Come again. Okay, go ahead and run the comic.
President Trump just posted on Truth Social that if Iran doesn't open up the Strait of Hormuz, the United States will hit and obliterate their various power plants within 48 hours.
48 hours later,
President Trump instructs the War Department to postpone any and all military strikes for a 5-day period.
5 days later,
President Trump just announced on Truth Social, I am pausing the period of energy plant destruction by 10 days.
10 days later,
President Trump announcing a ceasefire in Iran, saying he will suspend attacks for 2 weeks.
2 weeks later,
President Trump extends a ceasefire with Iran indefinitely.
And definitely later.
Over the weekend, President Trump says he's in no hurry to reach a deal with Iran and added that protracted negotiations have started to get very boring.
I don't even know, man. Happy Taco Tuesday.
Taco Tuesday.
It's time for Poll Watch now. But really, it's comical, but it's a reflection of what's actually going on.
Well, true comedy, Ed, it has to have a fact and basis to it, and it's laughable. You know, he makes these threats that are you just don't. It's like the bully on this on the street corner that makes these threats that he never follows through. At some point, you're just laughing at him.
But what about the credibility? I mean, wasn't it like 2 weekends back when he said everything's ready to be signed? We've got the agreement in place. We're going to settle it this weekend. By Monday, this will be all over.
Completely false statement.
Completely false. It's just like these guys were just saying. It just goes on and on because he doesn't know how to get out of it.
Yeah, J.D. Vance came out this week and said, we could be very close to an agreement. It could be in a week or it could be in many months. He's just trying to cover his bases so he can say, I was right. It took months, to get it done.
What motivation does Iran have to come to the table right now, though, Gary? They don't.
Zero.
I mean, they're sitting there and they're spending very little money. They're not getting hurt. They're not losing. People aren't dying in Iran. They're aggressively shooting these drones at us at very minimal cost. Yeah. And they've got the Strait of Hormuz shut down. And like you said, they're going to be making money by granting access to that now.
Whiskey Pete swaggering around telling us how we can bomb anybody into submission, except we still can't get the strait open. And we're finding out that they may have as many as 70% of their missile capacity still intact.
The problem he's got there, Ed and Gary, and we've lived through the Vietnam War back in the 60s and the early 70s and other wars. This country doesn't have the stomach, Ed, for this war. It's a very unpopular war. That matters. When you don't have the public supporting a war, what are you going to do? You can't just go heavy into Iran right now.
Yeah, it's taking us right back to Nam, where Trump kept pointing out to Welker that war went on for some 9 years, as if that's a concession that he can let this go on for multiple years without any consequence. Well, he ought to look at what the consequences of that war ended up being. I mean, that's why LBJ didn't serve another term that he could have.
And the important point about that is, keep in mind, this is exactly the opposite of what Trump campaigned on. He was complaining and he was saying that if you elect Harris, we'll be getting into one of these endless Mideast wars. So it's like a movie where you go, wait a minute, this is not the movie I walked in on. It's exactly the opposite of what Trump was promising. There was no debate during the campaign about how we needed to bomb Iran and protect us from their nuclear capabilities. None of that was discussed.
It's time for Poll Watch. 62% of Americans believe the world, including the United States, will not do enough collectively to avoid the worst impacts from climate change. And that's up almost 10 points from just 2022. 87% of Democrats say the U.S. is doing too little to slow climate change, compared with 31% of Republicans, and only 22% of Republicans say climate change is already hurting Americans. I'll tell you what, the worst part of that whole deal is that what happens and what takes place when all these glaciers start to melt. It's irreversible. for
the
centuries.
The headline in today's Tampa
Lived
Bay
with it
Times
forever.
was solar power surpasses coal in U.S. energy mix. And we've got a president who's fixated on how coal is the future. He's stuck back in the early 50s, apparently.
And still thinks if you wash it, it becomes clean coal.
And he's
Are you kidding?
And he does everything he can to prevent the pursuit of other types of energy sources like solar power.
We were complaining last week that Bill Pulte has been named the acting director of the National Intelligence with absolutely no experience in it. But I think does it really make any difference? Because after all, a crooked Donald really needs intel. Doesn't he just pick up the phone and call Putin? After all, he made it clear at Helsinki that he trusts him more than our own intelligence agencies. So I don't frankly see the problem.
Well, what's interesting there, though, Trump understands that he's getting a lot of pushback from the senators and Congress people who are Republicans about Pulte because he's clearly, as we talked about last week, unqualified. And you're giving this person access to all this, as you mentioned, Gary, last week, all this intelligence, and he's got loose lips to sink ships. But he's now talking about nominating someone else other than Pulte for the permanent position. So we'll see how that goes.
He only wants him in there to go seize voting records, in the midterms. So that's the sole reason he's put this guy in here, because he will do anything.
And as you mentioned, Gary, he's got 200 and some days that would put us through the election to do that.
Yep.
Well, here's something that'll compel a couple attorneys to sit up. Last week, Susan Douglas, who's a political organizer, and Paul Romano, a Vietnam War veteran, represented by the Public Integrity Project, filed a federal lawsuit to stop the Ultimate Fighting Club cage fights at the White House on Trump's birthday this Sunday. Fighters are expected to conduct this is right out of the lawsuit, quote, they're expected to conduct the ceremonial weigh-ins and face-offs at the Lincoln Memorial, make pre-flight walkouts from the Oval Office, and do combat in a massive structure now under construction just steps from the the executive residence. The lawsuit says this plan is deeply corrupt because it's being organized by the UFC, whose chief executive, Dana White, is a close friend and ally of the president. The president is giving White and his company what none have enjoyed before: unfettered access to the White House and Lincoln Memorial to stage a private, for-profit sports event with all the promotional and branding opportunities that accompany such success. One executive recently called the event the greatest earned marketing tool of all time. I understand it's going to cost something like, $60 million to build this thing that the UFC is paying for. But isn't it true? What are they doing using our national monuments for a private operation? That's unbelievable.
I thought when I first heard that was a joke. Sadly, I should never assume anything that Trump does is a joke because it just gets worse.
The lawsuit says, quote, federal law tightly restricts private use of the nation's capital's most sacred monumental spaces, unquote. And Trump and the administration appear to be using the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence to relax those rules. But it's really, of course, it's tied to Trump's 80th birthday. It's supposed to be hot, humid, and possibly thunderstorms in the area. The suit lists the many ways in which the UFC fight is a money-making venture for the company and for Trump, including the fact that he bought between $15,000 and $50,000 of stock in the parent company of UFC, which is called TKO Holding Group. That would be a violation of the Emoluments Clause, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, just let's add that to the list. That's about 1,000 things he's done that have been illegal.
Yeah, and he's selling VIP packages for more than $1 million while offering sponsorships to an overseas cryptocurrency exchange, and how the fight is being streamed through UFC's broadcast partner, Paramount Skydance, another one of his buddies, the Ellisons. So, it's all about the grift. Everything has to be about him. When the lawsuit was filed, they were saying that they didn't go through the permitting process. They didn't get any of the approvals that are required from the agencies that are in charge of events on the mall. So they're using the Lincoln Memorial as some sort of a backdrop for promotion. they're putting up this huge thing in the lawn of the White House without any kind of permits or environmental approvals that are ordinarily required for those things. And the White House originally said, well, the White House didn't ask for this. It's being done by a private company, and they don't have to go through it's always a shell game with them, similar to the way that they did the Alligator Alcatraz thing here, where they said, oh, it's a state project. And so the federal environmental review is not required. No, and the state says, no, we're going to be paid by the Fed. So it's not a state. It depends on which day it is, which hat they put on. And just follow the damn law.
Mm-hmm. And you think about it, Gary, you're right. I thought about this even with the first Trump administration, the amount of unnecessary litigation that has spawned because of a shell game is a good way to put it. It's the motive is always trying to skirt the law. Let's be cute. Let's be smarter than you, and we're gonna get this over on you. And whether he was selling cars at the White House, so who knows? Yeah. Next, maybe
another violation of the Emoluments Clause. You're not supposed to be hawking, commercial advantage for somebody from government property.
Well, I do think I heard something the other night, which because this is a nightmare. We're living this nightmare that just goes on forever with this incompetent president and corrupt, maybe more importantly, corrupt president, which is even worse than incompetence. But you remember after Watergate, there was a period of reform that came in, and nothing was perfect, but there was this sense after Carter came in 76, and even Ford. I mean, Ford I thought was a very good president. I know he lost re-election, but he was honest, and I was not a big fan of him pardoning Nixon, but I understood the reasoning for it. But there was a lot of reform legislation that came out of that. There was a lot of Democrats who were elected, and after the Nixon, after that debacle, and one of the commentators was saying there is an opportunity for that to happen again. As bad as this has been much, much worse than the Nixon Watergate. That was penny ante compared to what the corruption that's occurred, and grift, as you said, Gary, is a very good way to put it. So those of us as Democrats and independents, and there are Republicans who understand that this is corruption. This isn't hopefully an opportunity, starting with these midterms, to try and say we never thought that the bounds of this democracy would be pushed to such a level of greed and corruption and grift, and let's do something about it so it never happens again.
Yeah, we didn't think we needed guardrails that we do need, because we've never thought that we would have somebody in that office who would push everything to the limit and essentially be a criminal.
Well, speaking of criminals, Graham Plattner is now the Democratic nominee to go up against Susan Collins for the Senate seat in Maine. And we've learned a few things about the guy. Of course, he had that Nazi death's head tattoo on his chest for close to 20 years. He posted on Reddit that white rural Americans are racist and stupid, and all cops are bastards. And despite presenting himself as a humble oysterman and Maine veteran, he's a graduate of one of the nation's most elite private schools. Now that he's won the nomination, a little more information has come out. Multiple outlets reporting that in early 2025, months before announcing his candidacy, he was caught by his wife juggling as many as 6 separate sexting relationships with other people. Sounds a little like Trump having an affair while his wife is dropping a kid, doesn't it? But predictably, progressives are sticking by him. Elizabeth Warren, who's the Democrat from Massachusetts, said she's worried about gasoline prices, not Plattner's texts. So much for the idea that Democrats are the adults in the room.
And I don't want to hear one word from these Republicans who have spent 10 years enabling a sexual predator in the White House. They better shut the hell up and start lecturing us about this Graham Plattner behavior. By the way, it hasn't been criminal. There's certainly been negative things happening. He served in 2 wars that Susan Collins voted for, and he's come back with, obviously some some syndrome, some issues there. It's hard to defend some of that behavior. And I've read the New York Times article about some of these women complaining, but when you've got Kavanaugh, sexual assaults by Kavanaugh, allegations that were never existed. I don't want to hear one peep, not one, from these Republicans lecturing me, because they have no credibility at all when they've enabled the sexual predator that's still in the White House, period.
Ken Paxton, there's another one.
Yeah, he's a criminal.
I mean, I'm more worried about the stuff that Susan Collins has voted for in the 30 years that she's been in the Senate, including the entire Supreme Court that we have now. And she'll vote to confirm Todd Blanche, and that's, we'll get to that later, but I mean, come on. Everything that she has voted for has been a disaster.
Well, there's an audio, I think we don't have time today, but maybe next week we can run it. When she first ran, she committed to run just for 2 terms. And she said no one should be in the Senate more than 12 years. And I guess she just doesn't care about making commitments like that.
Well, moving on to Texas, Chris Cuomo is offering his analysis of the Texas Senate race and the test that it's going to pose for the MAGA Texans.
Breaking news, the Senate race in Texas is everything. This is the fight we need to have. This is the right place with the right 2 guys on the right things at the right time. Here's why. Because I believe if there's going to be massive change in the midterms, it's going to be seen in what happens in Texas. And this is about whether or not MAGA uber alles for the Republicans. Because you got rid of a good senator who was a good Republican and a real conservative because he won't kiss Trump's ass, and replaced him with a guy who trumps every kind of shady box of any other politician that you would want in this race against Tallarico. Tallarico is the antidote to this guy. Oh, he's a vegan. Who cares about what's on your plate? Who cares who's in your bed? I don't care who's in Paxton's bed. I don't care who's in Tallarico's bed. Do you? I care about the fact that he's dirty, that he helped a pedophile who messed with a 7-year-old and admitted it. I care that he got impeached for helping his buddy who's rich, that he checks every Trump box. No wonder Trump likes him, because all he's about is MAGA, meaning kissing Trump's ass. How's that great for Texas? Oh, but look at the primary. Trump really killed Cornyn. Yeah, among the base. Yeah, he doubled the turnout among his base in the primary, but is that all Texas is? This is the test. And yeah, this is hard for Tallarico, but man, do they have him wrong. He is not weak. He is strong on what matters to people, and he wants to work with people, and he shows compassion because that's how he lives his Christianity. The other guy says he's a real Christian. How's that going? I think this is the right guy to make the right case in the right place at the right time. And we better all be watching. And especially see what MAGA thinks its best foot forward is. MAGA uber alles, or is it about the many and their needs and not the wants of the few? Watch this race. Tallarico could be the guy.
Yeah, I thought that was very well stated by Cuomo. One of the things that we haven't talked about, though, within the game is how this, Trump picking this more MAGA, much more flawed candidate is affecting the amount of money they're going to need to spend in Texas. And that now affects the amount of money that you can spend in North Carolina. For example, what's happening in North Carolina, they're pretty much giving up North Carolina. So it's hurting the candidate in North Carolina who's going to lose to the popular former governor of North Carolina. Then you look at Ohio, which was in the Republican seat. Sherrod Brown is up 8 points in Ohio because he's running against a guy that wasn't even elected. He was appointed when Vance became vice president. So it's affecting financially. It may be affecting Florida. I mean, Florida may well be in play. Certainly Alaska's in play. We talked about the other week Iowa being in play. So when you look at Texas and you start looking at this chess piece, Gary and Ed, it affects the amount of money invested in these other states. So even if they fight hard and win Texas, which I think is not a given. I mean, we've always had our hearts broken in Texas with other candidates, but I think they've pretty much given up on the North Carolina Republican candidate. It's affecting Ohio, could affect Florida. It's going to affect Alaska, may affect Maine. So it's helping the Democrats in other states financially.
Yeah, and Tallarico is a great communicator, and I think he's really going to speak voters the way that they'll understand, that we're going to bring back a little bit of civility and to politics. And I think there's a yearning for that from a lot of people.
Well, the ultimate irony is Paxton attorney is endorsing Tellerico. And, Gary, as attorneys, we know our clients better than anybody. So I thought that was very telling when his attorney went out of his way to endorse Paxton, his former client's opponent.
Yeah. But these are really the critical races with respect to control of the Senate. In other words, Maine has got to go Democratic and Texas. And if they can do it, then there's a serious possibility that even the Senate will be in Democratic control. Isn't that right? But you really need both of those races to do it.
Well, but what's happened, Ed, because of this horrible economy and this just malpractice with Iran, et cetera, more cards are at play. Alaska's at play. The congresswoman in Alaska is winning, and because she was a I think that's a statewide when you're a congressperson. Iowa is now in play, as I think, Gary, you mentioned last week. Ohio, I never thought Sherrod Brown would be up 8 points at this point. He was as you know, a senator and lost a few years ago.
And
Texas,
a popular senator in Ohio for many years. He's a working class kind of guy. So
they need to net 4. You can't lose Georgia. Michigan is an open seat now, but I think, again, the economy is going to help. If we don't lose any of those seats where Democrats hold now, and I think Georgia, I think Georgia's kind of given up. That I don't hear my Georgia friends talking big against our friend there in Georgia.
Unless they seize the ballots, that'd been really be the only way that he could lose.
So if you get North Carolina, Maine, Alaska, you need one more, and you need one more from Texas, Iowa, Ohio. Maybe Florida. I mean, people weren't talking about Florida 2 months ago, but if I were a Republican and you're talking about raising money, you're having a conversation in states you didn't have a conversation about 2 months ago. So we'll see.
Yeah, and in Georgia, it's just Ossoff that's running, right? So the other guy stays in.
And you made a good point the other day, which is this redistricting, which is nothing more than corruption and cheating, doesn't affect the Senate races. So that's another reason why it's important to win those Senate seats.
Well, one other quick bit of news that came out this week is the Trump stain, the blemish on the Kennedy Center has now been removed.
You mean the stain of his name? Yeah. The judge ruled last week, put an end to our one of our nightmares, that Trump has been trying to remake Washington in his own image, and he picked a hand-picked board to go and take over the Kennedy Center, and now they decided we'll go ahead and put his name on it because he wants it. So the Donald J. Trump and John F. Kennedy Memorial Performing Arts Center is not what Congress said should be the name of this memorial that was created by statute, just like the Lincoln Memorial and the Jefferson Memorial.
The Washington Monument.
This Performing Arts Center was the memorial for Kennedy after he was assassinated. Mm-hmm. And the judge said, Congress has to change the name of it if they want to change the name of it. You can't do that by yourself. And so he gave them 2 weeks to take the name down, and they didn't wait 2 weeks. It happened the next day. They were taking the letters off of the side of the building. So, I'm sure they will appeal it, but I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah, well, he's trying. He's going to be 80 here in a
Sunday,
and he knows. He's an old 80. He's not a young 80 to me, mentally or even physically. He's an old 80. He doesn't exercise. He doesn't read. But this arch he wanted was going to prevent the view of the Arlington National Cemetery. Yeah. My parents are buried in that cemetery. It's offensive that he would think that's more important than the view of Arlington National Cemetery.
It is, but he doesn't care as long as it's a monument to him, because he's not accomplishing anything on his own. So he wants the monuments to tell future generations that he was the great president.
If you listen to his nephew, there's a cruelness to Trump, and it came from his father. There's a meanness to him. There's a lack of empathy. He doesn't even attend his son's wedding the other day. If you have any question about his sons who beg for that man's approval. It's sickening to watch. But there's a meanness and a cruelness to this man that is very unhealthy.
Well, that wraps up our first hour of The Voice of Reason. There's another hour to go. It's time for a short break for some national and international news now from America's gold standard for conservative propaganda, Fox Fake News. Now, when we return with the second hour of The Voice of Reason, we're going to follow up on that conversation we had during last week's show with Paul Malloy, host of Freedom Works. Heard every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday here on WTAN, and his eye in Northern Sky, Angelo. Also, the astonishing corruption that prevails throughout the Trump administration at levels nobody ever thought possible here in America, beginning with the nomination of Todd Blanche for the United States Attorney General. Ed Golly inviting you to stay with me, Gary Gibbons, and Kevin Carey here on the Tan Talk Radio Network, where the Voice of Reason will return in just a few minutes with more of the issues that conservatives never want you to hear about.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
Iran is going to be attacked again. I'm Dave Anthony, Fox News.
Yeah, there will be more bombing tonight. It'll be bigger, more powerful.
And President Trump tells Fox that comes after hitting Iran very hard a second night in a row.
We've knocked out all of their anti-aircraft. They don't have they have nothing. I mean, they may get lucky with a shoulder weapon or something, but for the most part, they have no defense.
The president says he also wants to take Iran's Karg Island to get their oil infrastructure.
It's a little longer process, something that's a guarantee if I want to do it.
Mr. President.
But I'm not sure the country has the appetite for it.
Iran has retaliated, launching drones and missiles at Gulf countries with American military bases, calling the ceasefire practically meaningless now.
Overnight, the United States unleashed powerful strikes against the Iranian regime. U.S. Central Command says a variety of targets were hit, including Iranian surveillance sites and air defense systems. Speaking from the Situation Room overnight, President Trump told Fox News 49 Tomahawk missiles hit locations as close as 40 miles from the capital of Tehran. Positions were also targeted along the southwestern part of the country.
That's Fox's Trey Yingst in Tel Aviv. Of course, the conflict's driven up oil and gas prices and overall inflation.
The producer price index for May rose more than expected, up 1.1%. The PPI measures prices at the wholesale level. The increase was more than estimated.
Fox's Ginny Casola. The annual wholesale inflation rate also more than expected, 6.5%, the most since November 2022. Back to the president. He also posted on Truth Social a call for Republicans
to advance and pass what he calls Recon 3.0. including $350 billion in new defense spending and voting reforms in the stalled Save America Act. Budget items that can be passed with a simple majority, with no support from Senate Democrats.
That's Fox's Chris Foster. The last reconciliation bill, Democrats could not block funded Border Patrol and immigration enforcement. America's listening to Fox News.
If you want unlimited talk, text, and data on a crazy fast network, Big Wireless will sell it to you right now for as little as $70 a month. Or you can buy it from Pure Talk for half of that. I'm talking about unlimited talk, text, and unlimited data for just $34.99 a month. Stop paying the big guys twice what you need to. Dial pound 250, say my name. That's pound 250 micro to switch to Pure Talk, where the savings are truly unlimited.
I move mountains for a living. Literally. That means I don't carry hand lotion, and when it comes to serious heartburn, I don't mess around with anything but Rolaids Max Strength. Its dual-active formula has 1,500 milligrams of calcium carbonate and magnesium hydroxide that relieves heartburn fast. And the best part? The roll fits right here in my pocket, so I can get back to moving mountains.
Rolaids spells powerful relief. 1,500 milligrams is our highest amount of antacid per tablet. Read each label. Use it directed. Keep out of reach of children.
Did you ever think about hosting your very own radio show? Here's how.
Hey, Tampa Bay, did you know you can have a 1-hour program on the Tan Talk Radio Network for less than the cost of one 60-second announcement on many Tampa Bay stations? That's right. We'll put you on the radio for less than the cost of one 60-second announcement on many stations. Check it out today. Use your program to promote yourself, your business, or someone else's business. Call Lola Jean, the broadcast queen, 727-510-7622. That's 510-7622. Call Lola Jean now to check out your Tan Talk Network program. In addition to network radio, we'll stream your program in audio and video all over the world. Call Lola Jean now, 727-510-7622. Call today. Your network 1-hour program can start tomorrow. Broadcast your message in audio and video on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Now, the voice of reason continues here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Here again is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
With me in the Tan Talk studio, my co-host, attorney, and former circuit judge Kevin Carey, along with Gary Gibbons, also an attorney. Well, last week we welcomed to the voice of reason the host of Freedom Works, who is Paul Malloy. You can hear him every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 o'clock right here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. And joining him was his call-in buddy, Andrew Cerisi, who regularly checks in from Albany, New York. I'll summarize it with the tagline that we use at the end of our show every week, which is, if the statement seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because a conservative said it.
Make them prove it.
Right, except maybe what we should say is look it up for yourself, because you'll usually learn that what they say simply isn't true. And that was the case last week. And, it's almost inexcusable these days because it is so easy to look up anything. You don't even need to know how to type. You can just ask your phone for facts or information and you get it. I don't know how one did it 30 years ago. That was the brilliance of the reporters and the press, is that they could find things and dig up facts that were legitimate. And now any clod can do it. Any fourth grade dropout can do it, unless you're a conservative. And then it seems you're immune from doing it. So now we contend that the Trump administration is steering this country toward fascism, along with taking over the courts, the Republican Party, the universities, the law firms, and influencing major businesses through the imposition of illegally imposed tariffs, which the president had no authority to do. It's imperative that the fascist also controls the media, right? This is right out of the Orban playbook. So we pointed out that Trump is taking control of CBS News because he wants to obliterate any negative reporting about his administration. Angelo disagreed when we were talking about 60 Minutes, and he claimed that the changes at CBS and canceling Stephen Colbert was strictly a financial move predicated on plunging ratings.
You're saying that the Republican Party, through CBS, fired Scott Pelley and doing all this and doing that, right? You don't think that the ratings have gone down, right? They got rid of Colbert because, their ratings are going down. It's all has to do with finances, correct?
Well, actually incorrect, because It turns out that 60 Minutes has not been floundering. It recently finished another season as the nation's top-rated news program, having increased its average viewership by 9% to 9.1 million, and having more than doubled its video views on social media to 2.5 billion. When it comes to Colbert, you remembered that when Carson dominated late night TV, that segment between his monologue and the comic bit that he would do after that was the most expensive television time you could buy anywhere in the world, in the known universe, because we couldn't go back and watch it the next day on our computer or a phone, right? We had to watch it live. We had to sit through those commercials. No more. Now people can call up these monologues routinely without ever suffering through the commercials. And that's what's biting into their revenue. It's not that people don't watch these guys and don't care about what they say anymore. It's that the revenue stream is changing with the technology. But still, 60 Minutes was bringing in more viewers, not less.
And Colbert was bringing in more viewers too, especially after he was fired. His show was the number one show at the time when he was fired, and yet they claimed that they had to do it for financial reasons. They did it because he was critical every single night of the president. And the Ellisons were begging for approval of a merger that they knew was going to require the approval of the FCC, which means you need the approval of Donald Trump, and that's what happened. That it was all financial for the next deal. It wasn't financial because CBS was losing money.
Yeah, because that's right. Her leadership, Barry Weiss, who was hired to head CBS News, her leadership's costing millions of dollars, but her stroking of Trump is going to give David Ellison billions with this merger with Warner Brothers. And that's all he cares about. The profit of one guy whose greed is immeasurable will trash 60 Minutes.
And whose pocketbook is large enough to buy CNN and CBS,
which is how it's done,
and control, and ABC is probably. So, at some point, he wants to control it all, using the Orban playbook, and we'll have nothing but propaganda.
Well, it's a level of corruption when you use the system and say, we're not going to, we have to approve this merger, which is worth, billions of dollars, in the future. And we're not going to prove that unless you do these things we tell you to do. That is corruption. That isn't, you could sit here and when there's going to be at some point an autopsy of this administration, and there'll be a chapter on this level of corruption. This is not what a democracy provides for, but where are those, we talk about guardrails to prevent that. But there's no question this was done because they knew that there was a threat of not approving that merger. You're exactly right, Gary.
Well, if we were still enforcing the antitrust laws, they wouldn't even be talking about approving these mergers, but they don't do that either. So they're creating this problem with monopolies and oligarchies in this country.
Well, you talk about 60 Minutes, has been, it's like Walter Cronkite. What they've done to eviscerate 60 Minutes is just tragic. And it's not as if we don't notice. They act like they can do this stuff and no one's going to notice it. It's made that a skeleton of what it was, and it's very sad.
They turned the lights out on CBS Radio, which used to be broadcast on this network.
And of course, the overseas broadcast, Voice of America, PBS, they want to shut all this stuff down. So there's only one message. Now, another issue we brought up was Angelo's claim that the protesters that we see on TV that are going after the ICE, the Gestapo, the concentration camps, or at the No Kings rallies are all paid professional agitators. And then he told us something that we really didn't believe.
Your governor in New Jersey said there were agitators coming in from out of town, professional agitators. A Democratic governor in New Jersey, the one that was just elected this past November, said there were paid agitators coming in from out of town. So if she's acknowledging it, I don't know who's doing it. I'm just telling you that there is a person or a group of people trying to overthrow this country, turn it into a socialist country, and eventually become a dictatorship. That's what's happening. That's what I believe.
Actually, what you believe isn't the truth. New Jersey Governor Mikey Sherrill did claim that out-of-state agitators were responsible for escalating unrest and violence during an anti-ICE protest outside of Delaney Hall detention facility in Newark. However, she did not specifically use the term paid agitators in her remarks. The governor and the New Jersey State Police publicly stated that several individuals arrested during the clashes were not New Jersey residents, but rather came from neighboring states like New York and Pennsylvania. And Governor Sherrill urged these out-of-state individuals to stay away, stating, quote, "You are not helping the people detained at Delaney Hall. You are not helping detainee families, and you are certainly not keeping New Jersey safe," close quote. And while the governor focused on out-of-state agitators, some conservative commentators and federal officials, such as our criminal border czar, Tom Homan, explicitly characterized these groups as paid, as organized actors on the national media. So let's hear what Tom Homan had to say about paid protesters.
Look, these are paid protesters. We got facial recognition of people from Portland. They're at Portland riots, and many from the Minnesota. This is a well-planned, established thing they're doing. This isn't homegrown. There's a lot of local people there to protest peacefully, and they certainly can do that. But the violence, majority of violence, not all the majority is coming from out of town people.
Well, again, I don't think there's facts support that. If these allegations are made.
No, but that's where Angelo hears this. Do they probably play that on OAN or Fox? And he hears that, and then he believes it's a fact that somehow George Soros is paying all these people to go to these protests. And I've heard him say, if we ask these protesters what they're protesting about, they wouldn't even know. They just go there to get paid. This is nonsense.
I'm still waiting for my check. I go to protests. I've been to all the No Kings protests. I haven't got a damn dime.
Well, if you talk to people at those protests, they're not going to stand there and say, "Oh, I don't know what this is about. I just came to get paid." You won't find one person that'll ever say that. Every one of them will say something that has agitated them and brought them to the protest about how this country's being run.
You know who did get paid? The people that were standing by the golden escalator when Trump came down years ago. He couldn't get anybody in New York who wanted to see him be anything other than leave town. And he paid people to be there.
You know, Ed, I wanted to comment on one thing you said a moment ago about how, and I agree with you, that we are at a golden age where we have at our fingertips accurate information. The sad part about that, and part of the problem I think we have here with the other side of the political spectrum, is it's also the golden age of misinformation. You have this bubble world that you can also have access to on your phone or computer that's completely false. And that's the problem with this. I mean, I never thought growing up that would have the access to information that we do. As you say, it's at our fingertips. But that's not the world they live in. They live in a world where they're told facts that just aren't accurate.
I know it. And his history is a little out of contention too, with the suggestion that socialism always leads to communism. He kept pointing that out to us, and said that he cited Russia as an example. Well, I thought about this a little bit and realized that actually communism came about in Russia through a revolution. And not because it was a socialist country that became a communist country, because rather it came about overnight in 1917, and in Cuba in 1957, I think. But it came about because they had aristocracy was running the country.
Yeah, they had czars in Russia.
And they were sucking all the money out of the country so they could have these uber elaborate lifestyles with palatial homes, servants, ballrooms, money, food, clothes, all the best that money could buy. And while the common people were just scraping by, living below the poverty level, which brought about the revolution. They didn't have socialism. They had poverty. And in France, it probably would have been the same issue, except that happened before even the 1800s. Have you ever seen the Palace of Versailles?
Yes, I have.
It's just dumbfounding to see what those guys could build in the 1700s. But what did it take to do it? Buckets of money, right? Truckloads of money, because that place it's not even in the city. It was, as you know, it was a hunting retreat. And he wanted to get away from the people. I guess it was Louis XIV. So he said, well, let's build this place out in the countryside where the people can't even access it, kind of like the ballroom in Washington, right? So let's hear what Angelo said about creeping socialism leading to communism.
9 times out of 10, socialism leads to more communism, more dictatorships. It's happened.
Where?
Okay. It has happened. It's happened.
Where has it happened?
It happened in Russia, right?
Again, wrong. No, it was a revolution. And you know, they were setting up the same, or they had the same situation that we're kind of leading to in this country, where a handful of the population has all the money, billions of dollars, and all the power to control the media and the government. That's what leads to revolution. That's what may lead to the end of our own republic before we know it.
Well, it's no question, as I've said before, Ed, this country is less stable today because the middle class has been shriveled, and so for the rich to get richer and the poor to get poorer and the middle class to shrink, that's the formula for what you're talking about. And that's what all these third world countries, when there's revolution, it's because there's no stable middle class. And it's just to have the rich get richer and richer. I don't know how much how rich they need to get before it stops. Is there ever a stopping point? I don't think there is under Trump.
No, I think not either. I think, they always want more.
It's like a drug. It's like a drug. I think, like an addiction to wealth. Everything else be damned. And we talked earlier. I don't want to go on too much about this, but we talked about some of these red states that the farm workers are being hurt, and also we've talked about how these Medicaid cuts and the nursing homes and hospitals being closed. At some point, these Trump voters, I think, are understanding that they're not being helped by this greed. They're not getting any richer. The stock market isn't affecting them one bit. What's affecting them, if you're a farm worker in Iowa, is the fact you're not being able to get fertilizer. You're not being, your fuel costs are going up. All the things that matter to you. And what does Trump say? It's a hoax. He says that this affordability is quoted, I'm quoting him, is a hoax, and it's not real. And that, even a Republican who voted for Trump is offended. I would think, if they're rational, would be offended by that.
It's not a hoax when you go to fill up your car. Everybody sees it every week, and you ride down the street and the prices go up to 25 cents overnight, per gallon. It's
Well, what's happening, Gary, too, is people can't afford to fill up their car. They go and they get $20 of gas, which is what, 3 or 4 gallons? It's not. I mean, it's not even getting it to half a tank. But people are not able to afford filling up the tank these days.
It's going to get much worse because we've blown through the strategic reserve trying to keep prices lower than they would otherwise be, and everybody that's looked at it says it's going to get a lot worse.
And as for the contention that the prices will drop dramatically as soon as the Strait opens, that just shows that he doesn't understand, he being Crooked Donald, that oil is purchased in futures contracts. So roughly 90 days ahead of time. And so people buying oil today are guessing what the price is going to be, and will have bought it by the time this thing opens, and they're going to want to recover what they paid for it. The refineries will, of course, they've still got to buy oil from overseas because they need a specific kind of Brent crude to refine. They don't want to rebuild the refineries. It's too expensive, and they don't make a lot of money refining it. They make it selling what they refined. Well, they're going to be stuck.
Let me broaden this economic discussion. As I mentioned, the inflation rate was well above what they predicted. It was 4.2% in May. We're now in early June. He has put his own Fed chair in place, and I'm sure he's told that Fed chair you need to reduce interest rates. That will never happen when you've got interest rates at 4 and 5, or inflation rates of 4 to 5%. And again, by the way, the Fed chair is only one of 12 votes on the Board of Governors, so the chair cannot mandate. So he's made this big deal about firing the past chair, who's still on the board, by the way. Yeah. It's not going to make a difference because there's no way in the world this inflation is going to allow there to be any decrease in interest rates. So his big talk about decreasing interest rates because of this inflation is not going to happen.
The other thing that Trump was bragging about yesterday was that they had snuck through something like 22 ships through the Strait of Hormuz at night, and that he had said millions and millions of gallons of oil have come through. We've been able to pull this off, and it's not like 100 million gallons has come through. That's
barrels.
That's barrels. Sorry, that's one day's supply
for the whole planet. Yeah.
Yeah. So. You know how many ships used to come through the Strait of Hormuz before this war started? 3,000 a month.
Yeah.
And he's bragging about 22. It just shows how desperate he is to have any kind of good news. And do you think Iran isn't noticing his desperation?
Well, they're shooting us. They're shooting our helicopters out of the sky. And did you hear what Trump said about that? He said, we're going to have to retaliate. What are you going to do?
They have. They launched a bunch of missiles last night.
Well, but I'm saying it's
not going to do anything.
That's exactly right.
And then we've got the administration officials, Bessent and Hassert, telling us that we have achieved the golden age of economic prosperity in this country. That idiot had the audacity to tell us that because credit card debt is increasing, it means the economy is firing on all cylinders and doing great. He doesn't understand that what it means is people can't pay their bills and they're going deeper in debt, just like our country is. It's unbelievable. Now, a masterclass in question dodging is presented here when Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse questioned Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent about the alleged harm done to Crooked Donald when 2 pages of his tax return had been leaked by a contract employee of the IRS.
Have you identified any precedent for the agreement not to pursue any tax claims against the Trump family or businesses?
I can't identify any precedent where 400,000 tax returns, including the people you just mentioned, and all of their employees were leaked.
The leak was by a contractor. Can you tell me what contribution is being sought by Treasury or by the IRS for the harm done by the contractor?
I'm unable to discuss most of this because of ongoing litigation.
So we have no precedent for it. No contribution is being sought from the contractor at fault. Was there any consideration to the government in return for the benefits of no audit, no investigation?
Senator, I'm unable to comment because of litigation.
I think you ought to know if there was any consideration offered or paid in return for that settlement. It's a very simple fact question. Was there or was there not consideration?
Again, there's ongoing litigation, and I suggest that you speak with the Treasury attorneys.
Was there a defense analysis memo prepared by the IRS? And more specifically, did you see it?
Again, I'm not going to be able to comment on these matters.
Was there any analysis of what harm befell President Trump from having his taxes released when every president since Nixon released their taxes and he had promised to? Did anybody analyze whether there was actually any harm at all to him in those circumstances?
President's rights under 6103 of the IRS code was violated, and equally as important, 400,000 taxpayers had that right violated, including every employee of the Trump administration, the housekeepers at Doral, the greenskeepers,
and
the cashiers.
And you're welcome to
none of you
pursue all of
seem to
that,
care.
but it doesn't answer the question of whether the president actually suffered harm. And you're not answering that question either.
Yeah, these officials sound like fools, just idiots. Maybe as I get older, I lose the screen between my mind and my mouth. But they're fools to compare. Sheldon Whitehouse is making some very valid points. There's been no precedent for there to be this blanket immunity. Of these 4,000 people that were subject to leaks, not one of them sought any financial recovery other than Trump. There was one other person who sought a mere I'm sorry. None. So there's no damages. And Gary, we've talked about this as attorneys. This case would be laughed out of court. So they cooked this thing up with the DOJ on the same side of the table, where the judge even mentioned there was no case or controversy. It's all corrupt as hell. And there's no damages suffered here. For him to go before them and say, well, just bring in my attorney, this is subject to litigation. They're foolish. I don't know who accepts this as being anything other than just clownish, corrupt activity. There's no damages suffered by Trump. And he sits there and has the gall to say, I want a $2 billion trust fund to pay off these people that resulted in deaths at police officers. Where does this come from? It is so corrupt, and they go before these Senate and congressional committees and just sound foolish. Pam Bondi sounded like a fool. They all sound like fools.
When you're in law school and you take a class on contracts, what you learn is in order to have a valid contract, there has to be some consideration involved, that something of value flowing from one side to the other. And that's why Sheldon Whitehouse was asking, where's the consideration? What did the government get out of this deal? And they didn't get anything. They got screwed is what they got, because the estimates are that it's anywhere from $100 million to $600 million of tax liability that Trump and his family and all their companies are being sold. Don't worry about it. We're never going to try to collect it. We're never going to try to audit you again. You can do whatever the hell you want to do. Go back. Like I said a couple of weeks ago, they can go back and amend those returns and ask for even more money. Well, come on. How crazy is this whole
Gary,
thing?
you're right. But there also was no damages suffered by these 4,000 people. This is all a scheme. This judge felt played, like I said last week, and the judge is not putting up with this. It's a shell game. It's corrupt. And to say, well, all these, there was a violation by disclosure. You weren't damaged by it at all. And as you said, you've got to, as we know as lawyers and judges, you have to show how you've been damaged. He doesn't care about that. He goes to the DOJ that is all just his lackeys, and they've in fact ignored the court system. We don't need the court system. We'll do this ourselves. And it's Trump's piggy bank with the DOJ to the tune of $2 billion.
These were all Todd Blanche's ideas on how to gain favor with Donald Trump so that he could get the job of his lifetime. He wants this job so badly, he's willing to do anything, including creating a slush fund to pay, people who attacked cops.
Well, Todd Blanche better hire some good lawyers when he loses that position and he's subject to bar discipline.
We aren't being governed, we're being grifted. We're going to take a quick time out here for some messages, the Conservative Minute. And when we come back, we're going to hear more about this Todd Blanche nomination to be the Attorney General. You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Gary Gibbons, Kevin Carey, me, Ed Golly. Back in just a moment with more of the issues the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. It's every Thursday. Tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you, and let's have some fun.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
And now it's time for the Only a Conservative Could Think It Minute with your host, Ed Golly.
Trump now considers himself to be one of history's great men. He no longer compares himself to George Washington and Abe Lincoln. Instead, He lumps himself in with Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Napoleon. Those three conquerors ripped apart the established order and pushed history onto its next stage through sheer force of will. Like those three, Trump has succeeded in bending the world to his will. He has ushered in a new age of populism, transformed the government into a tool of personal vengeance and enrichment, and perhaps permanently shattered the alliance system that united the West after the Second World War. On those grounds alone, Trump will be remembered as a history-shaping great man. But Trump might want to ponder how things turned out for that trio. After Alexander died at age 32, his vast empire was ripped apart as his generals engaged in a fit of fratricidal warfare. Caesar was dispatched at knife point by former friends and supporters and, for the founding fathers, became a byword for tyranny. Napoleon, meanwhile, perished in exile on a damp and rat-infested South Atlantic island, bitter to the end about his failed imperial project. History can lift a man to greatness, but it won't guarantee a happy ending. Think about that.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
It's 35 minutes past the hour. Andrew Weissman was an assistant United States attorney from 1991 to 2002 when he prosecuted high-profile organized crime cases. He served as chief of the fraud section in the Department of Justice and as a lead prosecutor in Robert Mueller's special counsel's office. In this week's rant, Weissman examines the transcript of the congressional testimony of the corrupt former U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi and completely dismantles her phony excuses for hiding the Epstein files.
The transcript of the congressional testimony of the former Attorney General Pam Bondi was just released. Now, there's a lot there, but let me focus on something that I think is key and important. The reports are that the Department of Justice is sitting on 3 million documents related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. 3 million. Now, Pam Bondi was asked about that, and she said that she was told, her understanding was that those documents have not been turned over for 3 reasons: non-responsive, privileged, or duplicative. Remember, those are the 3: non-responsive, privileged, or duplicative. Those categories make no sense. Let's take it from the back to the front. Duplicative. Well, who cares? Turn them over. We'll see if they're really duplicative. We'll be able to see it. Big deal. If you're like, so what? We get 2 copies or 3 copies when there was 1. Second category, privileged. The Epstein Transparency Act, as members of Congress have said, does not allow for claims of privilege. Period. The end. So the department can say, oh, we want to withhold this based on some undisclosed claim of privilege, like attorney-client privilege or some such privilege. None of that is allowed under a congressional statute. The end. So they cannot claim that that's why they're withholding something and also be within the law. Final category, non-responsive. That's a fancy way of saying unrelated. That makes no logical sense. To say that there are documents that have nothing to do with the Jeffrey Epstein case is an irrelevancy. So everything related to the Jeffrey Epstein case needs to be turned over, and none of the 3 categories make any sense. It makes it clear that the Department of Justice is not in compliance with the Epstein Transparency Act. This is food for thought when Todd Blanche comes up for his confirmation hearing to be the Attorney General of the United States. Pam Bondi also made it clear that Todd Blanche had a key role in all of these decisions. So what that means is for Todd Blanche's confirmation hearing that's going to be upcoming, keep your eye on the ball because this is going to be a key area for questioning.
Something we've emphasized this many times on this show. I'd ask these Republicans to read the statute. It's about 11 pages long. We've referenced it. I know, Gary, you've referenced it, particularly when it came out in November of 2025. It mandates, and as Weinstein just talked about, it mandates what should be produced. And it also mandates what has been ignored is that the Attorney General, whether it be Blanche or before Bondi, file reasons why they're not producing documents. That's been completely ignored. And we were talking last week with your friends from the Monday, Wednesday, Friday show. and they were making the point, that both Democrats and Republicans have been ignoring this, been talking about Biden. That the point I was making, and I think we all were making, was the bottom line was that the statute did not go into effect until November of 2025. So no, it wasn't the Democrats ignoring the statute. So they can't argue, and they did not have a response to the point we made that the statute has not been complied with. That's illegal. This wasn't a contested statute. It was a bipartisan statute. So there should be no debate about this. I'm not sure why Trump thought he could sign this in November, I think November 25th of 2025, or I think it was the 19th of 2025, November, and just ignore it. But that's what's happened. And the New York Times, by the way, came out yesterday with an extensive investigation of what happened. It's interesting to see they saw this as a crisis, and some of them thought it wasn't, but they really misread, I think, the public's response to this. I don't know, Gary, I'm sure you have some thoughts about it.
Well, they had meetings in the Situation Room about it.
Exactly.
The Situation Room, we've always looked at it as places where, war gaming and planning is done.
They saw the
decisions,
death of Obama, the murder of, not the murder, but the killing of the
Osama bin Laden.
Yes, yes.
There's that famous picture of all of the members of the Obama administration, including Secretary of State and Vice President. Everybody staring at the screen when they were going in to kill him. But instead, they're having political discussions about how bad this is going to be for Trump. And J.D. Vance apparently said, "I think we ought to release all of it." And everybody else said, "Oh, no, whoa, Nelly, we can't do that." And
they made a comment about the same rumor, as you mentioned, Obama's national security team watched the bin Laden raid was being used by Trump's people to strategize around their boss's connections to a convicted child sex trafficker. And Vance even floated the idea of getting Tucker Carlson to interview Ghislaine Maxwell in prison, worried that this cover-up strategy would cost Trump young voters. Wiles and this Blair, by contrast, initially dismissed the crisis as fringe noise. Bongino, who left his podcast to join the FBI, warned them repeatedly that they were miscalculating. So Bongino, who's long gone, read the room better than anybody, that this was a crisis. And there's a cover-up. We've talked about that. This is a cover-up. I don't know how they want to, talk about it, otherwise grease the pig. It's a cover-up, and at some point, a court is going to get involved with this. And I think we agree that I believe this Iran disaster was just a way to distract from this corruption and cover-up.
Which means Trump wants to keep it going, even though he's desperate to end it. Or he'll start something else. Maybe it'll be time to go after Greenland. I remember when we talked about the witness that came forward and claimed that Trump himself had raped her when she was 13 years old, that the conservatives just scoff at that and say, well, there's no credibility. But think about it. The FBI had her come in 4 times. Now, wouldn't they ask her questions like, how did you get to the island? When did you get there? Describe the plane you flew in. And her description would match exactly Epstein's plane. Did you land on the island? No, we had to land on the mainland and take a boat over. What the boat looked like? Her description would fit it. Who was there? When were you there? The time she's there is the exact same time that Trump was listed on the manifest for the flight on Epstein's plane to go there. And all these pieces fit together. And undoubtedly, they would throw her trick questions to try to determine if she's telling the truth or fabricating this story. And they kept finding out that everything she said was correct and fit, and she wouldn't have that information unless she actually did what she said she did and was where she said she was. So to just dismiss her and suggest that, she's just trying to get publicity. Look, did she try to shake down Trump for 100,000 balloons like Stormy Daniels? No. Is she going on the TV shows telling everybody who she is? Did she write a book? No, none of this. She simply went to the feds and said, I was raped by this guy. That's a credible witness. That witness should be really thoroughly examined as a credible witness. And undoubtedly, that story she's telling is in those 3 million pages that are still being suppressed from us, which is why he doesn't want that coming out at any cost. Of all the crimes Trump can commit, of all the money he can steal, of all the lies he can tell, of all the grift, the one thing that his supporters won't put up with is pedophilia, and he knows it.
It's also a crime to lie to the FBI. Have they ever prosecuted her for lying to the
Never
FBI?
even thought of that.
No.
Well, and we haven't also mentioned today, which also was a very serious infraction of the statute, is they were supposed to protect the names of all the victims, which they did. They were sloppy as hell about that. And, hundreds of names came out. I would recommend to our viewers and listeners to read the New York Times article. Again, Bongino, who's gone, and there may be a reason for that, he exploded at Bondi in a DOJ meeting and later stormed out of a Situation Room confrontation with Susie Wiles, chief of staff. He privately, Bongino called the whole situation Trump's Iran-Contra. So there were some people like Bongino, again, who's gone, who understood the severity of this. It's not going away. It's a perfect storm that Trump's facing. When you add on, the economic crisis right now, this war that is going nowhere fast, other than just being we haven't talked today about the economic cost, which was, what was it, $1 billion a day? I'm sure that cost hasn't gone down. But it's just interesting from the article yesterday that there was an investigation, and to see that they understood this was a crisis. And for Bongino to say this is Trump's Iran-Contra, people probably can remember Iran-Contra was a pretty big deal back in Reagan's second term. There's a lot to talk about with Epstein. It's not going away. I think certainly if the Democrats take control of, particularly the House and maybe with some luck the Senate, there's going to be investigations. Pam Bondi to walk in there after she was removed and just have a private discussion where I don't think, Gary, she was even
under oath. No, they don't
joke.
put any of these people under oath because that's Comer, who is the chairman of that committee, has said, no, we're just going to have a conversation. Well, that doesn't do anything. If you're really going to have a hearing, bring people in and swear them in and make them subject to the penalties of perjury if they lie. And, things will change. That's why, whenever anybody has to go into court and prove that there's actually fraud in these elections, they lose because they won't lie in court. They'll lie when they're talking to Fox News or anybody. If the president's in the Oval Office talking to a gaggle of reporters, he lies all the time because there's no consequences for it.
Well, if you tell me that, Graham Plattner is sexting and how he talked to some women, but him winning would get Pam Bondi before a committee under oath, bring her in. Yeah. I'll accept those the negative part of Graham Plattner and, the House Oversight Committee. If she thinks this issue's gone away, she's sorely mistaken. She's going to, if the Democrats take either house, she will be back before a committee testifying under oath. And just what you said, Gary, subject to a felony perjury conviction if she lies.
Well, she threw Todd Blanche under the bus on everything at this little meeting that they had with Congress. And she said everything, with the Epstein files, he handled all of that. He's and everybody that's ever worked at the DOJ says that that's what's really the case, that the deputy attorney general is the one that does everything. And the real attorney general is, sort of this person that oversees, the big picture, but the nuts and bolts of what happens are done by, somebody like Todd Blanche. So, for somebody who had previously been experienced as a prosecutor in New York, he sure makes a lot of stupid mistakes and bad judgment. The Southern Poverty Law Center case, he went on Fox News and made a statement that was completely false. So then the Southern Poverty Law Center goes to court, files a motion to have him sanctioned for saying things, out of school that weren't true. And so he goes back on Fox News. And what do people always say? Like we heard Bessent say today, oh, this is in litigation, I can't speak about it. He doesn't know. I'm going to go speak about it because I'm auditioning for a job. So he goes and he says something completely opposite of what they had filed in court against the Southern Poverty Law Center. He's shooting himself in the foot. The Stormy Daniels case, he got paid $10 million to defend,
Whoa.
and he lost that case. Okay. And everybody that watched it said that he was the worst of the three lawyers. They said that Emil Bovine or whatever, I can't remember. He was actually did a good job in the parts of the case that he handled. The slush fund, that's Todd Blanche's idea. He dreamed that whole thing up to try to curry favor with Trump. The indictment of the 6 members of Congress that came out and said
Kelly and those guns.
Yeah, Kelly and the rest of them that had all served in the military that said, remember, you're taught from the first day that you're ever in the military that you are not supposed to follow an illegal order. Well, not only is that what the truth is, it's not a crime to be able to speak and say that, but he had them charged with, trying to have them indicted criminally. How bad of judgment is that? Letitia James' indictment is on his watch. The first time, apparently, he said, this is a bad idea. I don't think this is a good case. But then when he was auditioning for the job, he said, you bet, we're going back for number 2 and number 3. The Comey indictment, the 8647, taking pictures of seashells on the beach, that's Todd Blanche deciding to go after James Comey. Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, they had a subpoena, a grand jury subpoena, quashed because it was vindictive prosecution. I heard Andrew Weissman say, you know how many times that's ever happened? Never. Because they don't, if there's a crime to be investigated, they give free latitude to a grand jury to look into it. But in this case, it was so apparent that this was just a political move by Trump to try to get rid of Jerome Powell and get him to raise interest rates that they knew that there was no there. And the Abrego Garcia case, remember that one where the guy got
it's still out there, yes.
Yeah, well, that case got dismissed again because it was filed vindictively, and that was Todd Blanche again deciding that's what we'll do to try to keep this guy here so we can deport him.
That was an embarrassing. That was some silly traffic stop in Tennessee. They tried to drag him in. It was thrown out. But, politically, it's interesting, the politics of this. I don't think, some people give Trump credit. I think he's a very poor politician. He could have milked the Todd Blanche interim attorney general for over 200 and some days, but he didn't do that. He nominated him already. So he wants it to be dealt with by August. I'm not convinced with these 3 Republican senators who are walking out the door in North Carolina, Louisiana, and Texas that he's going to have the votes. We're going to find out. I mean, because it is an election year. But if I were Trump, I would have waited until afterward because he probably could have milked this and then nominated him after the election and maybe gotten lucky and kept both houses. But I don't know why if you're from you're Cornyn or you're Davidson from the doctor from Louisiana, is that his last name?
No.
What's his last name? But anyway, or the
Cassidy.
I'm sorry, I don't know why I say Cassidy, or you're the North Carolina senator who's voluntarily leaving. None of those 3 have any motivation to kiss Trump's ass, and this is not a strong candidate. He's not a popular candidate. You've been very specific, Gary, in things that he's done that have just been a joke. These are, you mentioned, in fact, the former FBI director. The last case was thrown out. This is not the first attempt to go after him. This is the second attempt to go after him.
In the Abrego Garcia case, the judge called out Todd Blanche specifically 30 times, saying, this was vindictive prosecution, and it was all orchestrated by this guy. He's supposed to be the top law enforcement officer of the country, but yet I think they are going to confirm him because as much as those people have nothing to lose, I think they don't care. I think they're going to their loyalty to the Republican Party is going to outweigh anything else. And instead of speaking truth to power and saying things that they know are wrong, they're going to go along to get along because they feel somehow they'll be able to go and make speeches afterwards or something and make money after they get out of the Senate. But
yeah, they can't. There's not going to get. There are $45 Democrats, 2 independents who vote Democratic. So there's basically 47 Democrats. Not one of them will vote for Blanche. So you need 51.
Yeah.
And frankly, if they approve him before the election, to me, that's even more fodder to complain to the public at the election. Say, look at this clown that they put in. And you've just went through, Gary, some very specific factual points. These aren't opinions you're making. So to me, it's a no-lose situation as a Democrat, because Blanche has a very poor reputation. People understand that he's not competent for that job. He's as much or more of a lackey as Pam Bondi was.
And the other thing that he was his bright idea was, when all the DOJ lawyers were facing problems with state bar associations, he files a brief saying, oh, they shouldn't be subject to any regulation by state bar associations or state Supreme Courts. And so he's basically saying, we don't want to play by the rules that every other lawyer is required to play by.
Yeah, that argument is just laughable.
Why would you do that? As somebody who's supposed to respect the law.
I practiced law with a guy named Reese Smith, who was president of the ABA and was president of the Florida Bar, and just people like that and I've known judges, they make these statements that are just laughable. There's nothing to support that's the premise that the DOJ can override a state Supreme Court and bar association. It's ridiculous. It's nonsense. Just like what Trump said in the interview with the Meet the Press person, Welker. It's just nonsense. I don't know how these Republicans or MAGA people justify any of those statements. I'd like to ask some of the folks on this on the other show, do they think it's actually legal to suggest the DOJ can override a state bar association in penalizing an attorney? You think there's any basis for that? And just get a response to that, because as attorneys and judges, we know that's not accurate at all.
The New York Times article that you referenced, when they were talking about the Epstein case and how to handle it, one of the ideas was to have Tucker Carlson interview Ghislaine Maxwell and try to get her to say something that was, Trump never did anything wrong. And Todd Blanche said, no, I'll go do that. And so he went down and interviewed her. And next thing you know, she's being moved to a country club prison and getting a puppy. So, what happened there? That's Todd Blanche. And the last one is in Minnesota, after Alex Preddy and Renee Good were murdered.
Cold blood.
The DOJ wouldn't allow the state of Minnesota to get anywhere near the crime scene to investigate, and they did their own investigation. And now Todd Blanche says, you will not turn that information over to the state of Minnesota so they can investigate. And Andrew Weissman said, you know how often that happens? All the time. The feds always give the information over to states so they can do their own investigation. And he said that this is the first time that's ever happened.
Well, Blanche is going to be shredded at the Senate Judiciary Committee. All of those issues are going to come up by the Democrats. I don't know. They think he's going to come in there and they're not going to bring those issues up. He's going to get shredded by all those issues. Now, maybe he'll limp by, maybe. You may be right about that, but these issues you mentioned, they're all going to be raised at this hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Any one of these should be enough to disqualify somebody who's supposed to be the top law enforcement officer of the country. And sadly, none of them are. And what you hear is, if we don't confirm him, maybe they'll nominate Matt Gaetz or someone worse like that. Well, it's fine. Make him go through the process of confirmation and say no to him too. Do your job. Fulfill your oath as a senator. They're not doing it.
Did you mention Adam Schiff and the multiple residences that he allegedly claimed were his primary residences? Wasn't that an issue that they were trying to bring against him?
Oh, yeah.
And yet Paxton has done it 3 or 4 times. And there's not even a hint of a suggestion that he's going to be prosecuted for that.
I think there are like 3 or 4 people in the cabinet that have done the same thing.
Exactly.
Because
cabinet.
they all are billionaires with multiple homes.
Now, that isn't called selective prosecution, is it? Don't ask me. I'm not a shark. I don't know. You tell me.
Well, that was our buddy, Bill Pulte's job was to drum up this, all this mortgage fraud in these various mortgage applications.
Which has landed him where he is now.
Well, it has, but it's an
Again, totally
embarrassment. I mean, the grand juries have thrown it out. The judges have thrown it out. Those mortgage fraud allegations are going nowhere. And as you said, it's ironic given the issues with our friend Paxton in Texas.
And it was illegal for him to go look at those mortgage applications for that purpose.
Yeah.
That's against the law. So,
well, what's the law got to do anything with this administration?
it doesn't. It's
we
sad.
could spend another half hour just talking about all the corruption that's going on with the Trump crime family that's being ignored.
And Ed, I know that we spend a lot of time being very critical. That doesn't happen lightly. Gary and I would say these things if we didn't firmly believe that there was illegal conduct going on.
A quote for today is actually a definition. It's the definition of narcissist, which is a noun, a more polite term for a self-serving, manipulative, evil jerk with no soul and no compassion. That's it for Voice of Reason this week. We'll be back next Thursday morning at 9 o'clock for another edition. And thanks to my co-host Gary Gibbons and Kevin Carey. Now, this is Ed Golly reminding you that if the statement seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because a conservative said it.
Make them prove it
up.